Welcome back to the channel. So when and how does the narcissist become a narcissist? It's a really good question. I haven't tackled this one for a while, but I have been thinking about it lately. And I can tell you this much. I haven't changed much in my opinion about this particular question um, really since the beginning. I think it was my view of it, I believe, was right early, and I think it still is under examination. I know. So the patterns and routines and traits of the narcissist, every single one of them that I know, and I grew up with some in my extended family, not my immediate family, my extended family, whom of course I didn't know they were narcissists. I didn't know what narcissism really was till I went through it in a romantic situation, really hardcore. And after that I got the wisdom. And of course, as you guys know, the light bulbs go off and then you start to revisit the past and you start to understand, oh, so they were, and he was, and she was, and him, and her, and it opens up all these boxes, right? The one thing I can tell you from what I know about every one of the narcissists that I have been acquainted with is that they were doing all these highly narky things in high school. They were doing all these things, and not that they started to do those things. I'm going to unpack this. It's not that they started to do those things in high school. But it's that by the time they were in high school and in their mid to late teenage years, all of those things had firmly taken root in their lives. Firmly. And they were, for all intents and purposes, at that point, a narcissist. So, this is my opinion. Tell me what you think. When does this happen? How does it happen? So, here's my basic belief on how this occurs. Some people will say the narcissist was either a golden child or they were undervalued, overvalued or undervalued, the two extremes. And I'm actually willing to admit that I think that does have a lot to do with it. So your childhood, the way you were brought up, the situation, whether you were undervalued or overvalued, does have something for sure to do with it a lot of the time. But I don't think that you have to be the two extremes. I think there are people in between that become narcissists, and all sorts of reasons. But the problem with the people who are, and I experienced this, I can tell you this, I've experienced this both ways with a person who had a childhood who was way undervalued, underappreciated, no attention, undervalidated, and someone who was basically the golden child who got everything they wanted, pampered, spoiled, rotten. And both of these polar extremes became eerily similar people. Even their financial situation, socioeconomic setting, those things were polar opposites growing up, but the two people grew up to be almost the same. Shades of gray, right? Differences. So when you are undervalued and undervalued validated, you grow up seeking validation. You want to be valued and validated as much as you possibly can because you're not getting that by your parents. And your parents are really the chief source of influence in your life growing up for most people. If you grew up with a mom or with a dad or both heavily in your life, they are going to be the most influential people in your life 99% of the time. If you are not getting what you need from them, then you are going to seek that elsewhere. If you are being over validated and they're giving you everything you want and no doesn't even enter the vocabulary and you're allowed to do anything, get away with anything, and you're basically pampered and spoiled, then come to expect that. And so if you crave it, nonetheless, you crave it even still. So you can see if you don't get validation, you crave it. If you do get the validation, then you crave it and you just grow to expect it. But I think what a narcissist does, whether they're the two extremes or somewhere in between, they grow up and what they learn is from an early age, whether they've seen it, they're mirroring it in others around them, they're being reared by narcissists, which often happens, or whatever the case is, they grow up and what they come to see little by little is that manipulating people gets them what they want. When they when they mess with people and trigger them and play games with them and are cutting and critical, they learn that all of this stuff achieves the desired outcome for them, which is validation, praise, attention, supply, as we call it. All those myriad things that feed their ego and fill them like basically a drug. And they know that the path of manipulation often gets them what they want. So they grow up and they learn that, I didn't get what I wanted and needed, so I went silent on that person for the next 3 days. I just wouldn't talk to them again till I got what I wanted. And you know what happens a lot of the time? You get what you wanted. And then you go, huh, and I'm talking about a child here. That worked. When I went silent, that got me what I wanted. And then they learn things like, well, I didn't get what I wanted, so I threw a tantrum. And I pouted and I screamed and sooner or later, that got me what I wanted. So they add that to the arsenal. So they're pulling out silent treatment when they need to, they're pulling out tantrums when they need to. And they get a little older and they learn this stuff, all of this early, and it just grows and it forms. And every time they make that decision to get their attention and validation and their needs met by a negative pattern, such as silent treatment or throwing tantrums or cold, going cold with somebody, cold shoulder. Every time they do that, and it reinforces that belief that they get what they wanted. And so they become more used to it. And they do it more and more. And each time they choose to give themselves over to what is basically, as we now know, the path of darkness. These are negative, dark, evil practices, sinful practices to do to people because they're painful. They're inflicting damage upon others. It's pure selfishness. And every time they do these, it reinforces that pattern of behavior, but it also convinces them all the more that this will work, and it gets easier every single time. So, for an example, if you guys, everyone out there, I know if you deny this, then if you deny that you've ever had sin, then you are of the devil. I'm telling you that right now, because only those of the devil deny that they've ever had sin. I can think of people who maybe lead this country who say, I've never done anything wrong in my entire life. I don't need forgiveness. That's of the devil. And the narcissist is like this. So, but every one of us we know have been caught in sin at various times in our life. We've battled it, right? And if you remember anything about that sin, those first times that you got into it, you felt that warring in your spirit. You knew it was wrong, and it was harder to give into it. But then when you did, the next time you gave in a little easier. And then the next time was a little easier. And that's how those things become patterns of behavior. And they can't be that way. They can't stay patterns of behavior. You can't stay perpetually trapped in sin. You can't do that. But my point is, it got easier to do the wrong thing. For the narcissist, it gets easier to do the wrong thing, and they don't repent. They don't seek that closure, and they don't seek a new life and a changed life, and they don't evaluate the things they do. So they just compound. And every time they do this, it gets a little easier and a little easier, i.e., they go a little farther down the path of darkness with every step. This is incremental. It's a process. You're not born into the world a narcissist. I don't care what people tell you. And even if there is a genetic factor, which who can even say? Even if there is, you didn't come out of the womb a narcissist. They are made, not born. And I'm telling you how they're made. And so they grow up and they get a little older, and the manipulative tactics increase because they're getting older. They're becoming of the world now. People are growing in intellect and ability, and you have to be more cunning and more cutting and more critical and more cruel. And they do that. And it's a building process. So their manipulation becomes more extreme. The way they cut and criticize people becomes more extreme. The tantrums they throw become more extreme. And they get older, and as an example, a, a man or a woman, they might think, I want that person. I am sexually attracted to them. I want that person. And what they'll do is anything to get what they want. So they will triangulate that individual with somebody else. They will say, well, I want that person so badly, but I also want to have control over that person. It's not just that I want them in my life, I also need to be in control because a narcissist craves control above everything else. It gets back to that validation thing. They need to be in charge. That is one of the primary rules of a narcissist. And that's why oftentimes a narcissist will leave you, just not deal with you if you won't give them power and control. Because they're like, I'm not dealing with a person who won't let me be in charge. I'm not doing it. So they triangulate. Well, I like you, but this guy asked me out the other day, and I don't know. I gave him my number. I might call him. If he calls me, I might call him back, or I might go on a date. These little ways I triangulate, or they went on a date with you and you're walking through the movie theater and they might just walk a little too closely to somebody else and eyes on them just a little too much so that you'll notice it. It's not by accident. All these little ways they triangulate you. You might be on the phone with them and they'll say, this guy keeps driving by me. He keeps staring at me. I don't know what he's doing. That's just an attempt to triangulate you. That's what, because you don't tell somebody that unless you think you're in danger. You don't say those sorts of things unless you're trying to get a rise out of someone. So they get better and better at that. And every time they triangulate, guys, it gets easier. And I'm telling you, it becomes almost like second nature. This is why I've said before to answer the question, does the narcissist choose to do evil? Do they know they're doing evil or are they delusional? And the answer to that question is yes. It's both. They know what they're doing, but every time they do this and they get farther down the path, and it gets a little easier to be wicked and a little easier, and those things become second nature to the point where if you're older, maybe you're 18, 19, 20, 30, 40, certainly as time goes on, you are with the narcissist, they will triangulate you in all manner of ways, and I'm convinced that they don't even necessarily know they're doing it half the time. They're so used to doing it that it's just like breathing. For them to be walking through a grocery store and to be with you and to be starting to talk to someone of the opposite sex and smile and I'm convinced that they just do these things half the time. Half the time. Because they become delusional. But they become more and more this way. And as things get older, usually what you have are some triggering events. They get used to these minor practices, all we've talked about, with gaslighting, people making people doubt their reality, triangulating them, criticizing, silent treatment, ghosting, because they know this gets them what they want and it becomes easier every time. But then as they get old enough, sort of an age of accountability type of thing, they are usually faced, like many of us, with big, major fork in the road life decisions where it's not just a bunch of little things, it's big, major events where you decide what type of person am I really going to be at the end of the day. And I believe it's those major events where they choose the path of darkness again, and that sort of catapults them in to this narcissistic wasteland. It's where many become reprobate. Not all are reprobate, but it's where many do. As an example, they may make some really bad decisions and they might be with child, we'll say. And their decision to it is, I won't be inconvenienced. I don't love this person I'm with anyway. This isn't fair. And they, of course, are no longer with child, if you catch my drift. That's a major life altering decision. It is one of the most egregious things you can do. And that sort of thing propels them much farther down the road. A major fork in the road where they had the path of darkness or the path of life or light, and they chose the path of darkness in a major, profound way. Other example of how this can happen. Let's just say the narcissist is plenty narcissistic, but let's say they got married young. They're 19, 20. Hit a little bit of a rocky patch because they caused it. And then they meet somebody at work. They have a decision to make. This person likes me. I could have them, but I did say I do. I did commit my life to this person. I am supposed to be married to this person. I think I'll go have an affair. And once they do that just the one time, it becomes easier and they justify it in their minds. I did this because did this to me. He did that to me. They weren't a good partner to me. And they justify it, but that's a major fork in the road because that is infidelity at the highest level. You're a married person who said vows before God Himself, who entered into what's supposed to be the most sanctified covenant between human beings there is, and you chose to break every one of those things. That sends them catapult style down to the path of darkness. So add that together with all the other things they've learned of criticizing someone to beat them down to gain control, of silent treatment to gain control, of triangulation to make them jealous and to gain control. Everything ends up coming back to control, I'm telling you. And then they do those catastrophic, major life altering, life changing decisions that really send them down the path. And I believe that the narcissist encounters these sorts of situations. All this builds and comes together somewhere between, and this is my estimate, about 15 to 20 years of age. 20 is probably pushing it. I'm going to say 15 to 18, 19. Because I think decisions have been made by the time you're 19, 20. It's in that window right there. Now, they've been building their narcissistic traits the whole time. They didn't just start this. But by the time they've reached that age, they know full well what they're doing. They know why they're doing it. And they have willingly chosen in all the minor ways and in even major ways to choose the path of darkness. They want to go that negative path in life. All that comes together by about that time. And I think what happens, and the reason I say this is the abundance of narcissists that I have known, and when I can pinpoint that they really started doing these things. And every time I look at it, whether it's an extended relative or someone I knew in a friendship, an acquaintance, a romantic sense, I can always pinpoint it and at least say, by the time they were 18, 19 years old, they were firmly entrenched in these same patterns that they have the rest of their lives. And guys, we do know on a basic level about development. You really do become largely who you are going to be for the rest of your life by the time you are in those late teenage years. And those years are so formative. That's really where you've decided who you're going to be. And yes, there is spiritual change possible because I did not become a believer. I did not give my life to the Lord truly until I was 19 years old. Here's the thing. It's not as though I was this complete heathen who just did everything I wanted to do, who just screwed people over, who was just rotten, toxic, nasty. I wasn't really like that. So my transition to being a real believer was not this radical 180. It was more like a veering into the new direction. Most people, guys, don't have a polar opposite where they are the most nasty, vitriolic, horrible, rotten person, and then they just go whoop, and they're completely different. Not saying it's never happened, and don't say Paul, the Apostle Paul, if you're thinking that, because that's not what happened. He was a very zealous Jew who thought he was serving God. who really did think he was serving God and was very delusional and misled. And then he transitioned. So it wasn't like he did a 180. He did a 180 on his opinion of Jesus, but he did not do a 180 in terms of his path in life serving God. So don't Paul's not an example of that. It wasn't a 180. That usually doesn't happen. I don't know if I know anybody who I would say was, guys, but this is why we say, have you ever known a true, genuine narcissist who changed? I mean, someone that you could just definitively say they are a textbook narcissist and they've really radically changed. It just don't happen very often. It just does not happen very often, if at all. So by the time they reach, you are basically who you're going to be for the most part by the time you are in your late teenage years. And yes, of course, then still growth and transition occurs, but by and large, you're kind of set. The narcissist is the same way. By the time they reach that age, they are firmly entrenched in their practices, and there's very little that can be done outside of a radical spiritual transformation, which is very rare and still possible, but it would involve them wanting to do that. And that's the problem. It's not so virtually impossible because God can't work with a person and he can't transform the mind or anything. It's almost impossible because they have to want to change and humble themselves, and they just that is kryptonite to a narcissist. Imagine taking full accountability for your sins and mistakes, wanting to change, bringing yourself down low before anything like a creator. Those are all the things that narcissists are the most unwilling to do. So the question, when and how does the narcissist become a narcissist? Well, I just answered that. So guys, drop comments below. Tell me what you think. Am I right? Am I wrong? Tell me where I need to rethink things, or if you agree. So guys, I'll come at you with another one soon. Until then, God bless.